Over the past few weeks, news of Indian and other international students being deported from US universities has caused widespread panic and confusion. Headlines across major Indian media outlets, including the Times of India and NDTV, have reported shocking stories. Students being forced to leave overnight, visas being revoked without due process, and arrests linked not to crime, but to activism. For the hundreds of thousands of Indian students studying in the US, the question isn't just, is this true? It's, am I next? What's happening isn't rumor. It's very real. It began in early 2025 when a new wave of student-led protests erupted across several US campuses in response to the escalating crisis in the Middle East. Students protested US foreign policy, voiced support for Palestinian rights, and criticized university ties to defense contractors. While protests are nothing new in American universities, this time, something was different. Under a recently signed executive order, the US government began closely monitoring foreign nationals, especially those participating in or supporting movements deemed radical or extremist. Indian students were caught in the crossfire almost immediately. With over 331,000 Indian nationals enrolled in American universities, they formed the largest international student population in the country. Many were involved in peaceful demonstrations, attended rallies, or simply posted content on social media that aligned with global calls for justice. But soon, some began receiving alarming emails that looked official, cold, and final. They were being asked to self-deport. The legal basis for these actions stems from Executive Order 14188, signed by President Trump in January 2025. The order aimed to combat anti-Semitism and prevent the abuse of educational institutions for extremist ideologies. On paper, the order targets hate speech and violent extremism. But in practice, its enforcement has been far more sweeping. Universities were asked to submit lists of students involved in protests. AI tools were deployed to scan social media for keywords, images, and suspicious activity. And soon, a troubling pattern emerged. Students from countries like India, Pakistan, Iran, and Egypt were being disproportionately flagged. One of the most publicized cases is that of Ranjani Srinivasan, a 37-year-old Indian PhD student at Columbia University. She had attended multiple campus protests but was never involved in any illegal activity. Her visa was abruptly revoked, and she was given 10 days to leave the US or face detention. In an emotional interview from Toronto, where she has now relocated, she said, "Columbia University betrayed me. I thought I was in a country that valued free speech. I was wrong." Another case involved Badar Khan Suri, an Indian postdoctoral fellow at Georgetown University. He was arrested by ICE after being accused of spreading pro-Hamas content on social media. His case is still in court, but his arrest sent shockwaves through the Indian academic community. Students began deleting posts, locking down profiles, and cancelling plans to attend upcoming demonstrations. Fear, not scholarship, became the defining emotion of student life. What's most disturbing is that these students are not being deported for breaking the law, but for expressing political opinions. US immigration law allows for visa revocation on grounds of national security concern, a term vague enough to encompass almost anything. In the past, this clause was used sparingly. Now, it's being wielded as a blunt tool of censorship. Legal experts and civil rights organizations have begun sounding the alarm. The American Association of University Professors, along with the Middle East Studies Association, has filed a lawsuit challenging the use of immigration law to suppress political speech. They argue that this violates the First Amendment and sets a dangerous precedent for academic freedom. "Today, it's students," said one AAUP spokesperson. "Tomorrow it could be faculty, researchers, or journalists." And yet, universities have largely remained silent or complicit. Many institutions have complied with federal requests for student records, citing pressure from the Department of Homeland Security. Some claim they are legally obligated. Others seem to be protecting their own reputations and federal funding. For students, this has led to a sense of betrayal. The very institutions that encouraged them to think critically, engage with world issues, and raise their voices are now turning them in. This isn't just an American issue. It has significant implications for India and its education pipeline. Indian families spend billions each year to send students abroad, particularly to the US, with dreams of global careers and top-tier education. The perception of the US as a safe, welcoming destination for higher studies is now under threat. Already, education consultancies in cities like Delhi, Hyderabad, and Bangalore report that students are reconsidering their options. Canada, the UK, and Australia, despite their own challenges, suddenly look more attractive. There's also the issue of double standards. While American citizens can, and often do, protest without fear of legal repercussions, international students are being punished for participating in the same events. This raises questions about whether the US is applying its values equally. When freedom of speech becomes a privilege based on your passport, can it still be called freedom? Indian authorities, too, are beginning to weigh in. The Ministry of External Affairs has acknowledged the growing concern and said it is closely monitoring the situation. There have been calls for the Indian Embassy in Washington, D.C. and consulates across the US to offer legal support to affected students. But for many, the damage has already been done. Careers have been derailed, families traumatized, and academic dreams left in ruins. It's also important to note that not all students being targeted are actively involved in protests. Some were merely adjacent, roommates of activists, followers of certain social media accounts, or members of student organizations that were flagged. The net is being cast wide and indiscriminately. For students in F1 or J1 visa categories, even a minor infraction or misrepresentation can trigger removal proceedings. This level of scrutiny has created an atmosphere where students feel they must remain silent, not just in class, but online, in dorms, and even in private messages. So, what can be done? First, awareness is key. Students need to be informed about their rights, the limits of their visas, and the legal consequences of various forms of speech and protest. Universities must do more than issue vague warnings. They must provide real legal support, counselling, and transparency. International offices should act as advocates, not just compliance units. Second, diplomatic pressure from the Indian government can go a long way. The US values its relationship with India, not just economically, but strategically. If Indian students are being targeted unfairly, this must be raised at the highest levels. And third, the academic community must push back. Professors, administrators, and American students must speak out against the weaponization of immigration policy as a tool of censorship. True education thrives on debate, dissent, and diversity. Silencing one group silences the entire campus. Because, at its core, this isn't just about deportations. It's about what kind of world we want to build. One where people are punished for their beliefs, or one where they are empowered to challenge the status quo. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Should universities protect student activists regardless of nationality? Or is the US government justified in tightening control? If this video helped you understand what's really happening behind the headlines, don't forget to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because the truth needs a voice.